Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Very, very warm welcome to this Flexibility Works webinar on how to get ready for the new legislation on flexible working. I'm joined this morning by some colleagues from the Flexibility Works team, Lisa Gallagher, who you'll hear from later on, Laura Jane Clements and Jenny Legg, who have organised us all this morning, brought us all together. So a huge thank you to them for all their hard work in organising this webinar. Lovely to see some familiar faces joining and also lots of new people. As I said, this has been a really popular event, really popular topic. So great to have so many of you with us this morning. For those of you who are new to us, very briefly, Flexibility Works is a consultancy and training organisation. We're a social business. We provide practical tools, research, support and resources to help employers create successful, flexible working cultures. I want to very quickly also say a huge thanks to our supporters and sponsors who help us put on events like this. So those are Scottish Water, Pursuit Marketing, Quorum, Network Resources, Arnold Clark and the Scottish Government, who are all our, I guess, allies in our ambition to create a working culture that truly values work-life harmony in a way that helps people and businesses to thrive. In terms of the format and logistics for this morning, as you all know, the law on flexible working is about to change. And today we are going to cover what is changing, what you need to do as an employer to get ready, and why flexible working and making it more available and more visible is good for your business and your bottom line, just as much as keeping you legal. We're here until 11:30 this morning, and we're going to hear from four great speakers. We're going to hear from Michael McLaughlin, who is a partner at Shoosmiths and an expert in employment law. We're going to hear from Dawn McFarlane, who is the Managing Director of Scotia Homecare Solutions. We also are going to hear from Kirsten Oswald, who is the SNP Westminster spokesperson for Women and Equalities. And we also are going to hear from Steve Collinson, who's the Chief HR Officer at Zurich. We've also got a short video message from Neil Gray this morning, who is the Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary for the Wellbeing Economy, Fair Work and Energy. And after you've heard from all of our speakers, there will be time for questions. So if there's something that you would like to ask, please just pop it in to the Q&A as you think of it, just as we go along, and we'll get through as many of the questions as we can later on. So we've got lots to cover, but before we get going, we would like to invite you to take part in a quick poll. We're really keen to find out how confident the people here today are that their organisations are indeed ready for the new flexible working legislation. So Laura Jane just popped the poll up on the screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. I would invite you just to take part in that. And we'll share the results of the poll later on. So you can just let me know, Laura Jane, when you think everybody's had the chance to take part in that.
Nearly there. Okay, I think we're good for that.
Great. Okay, so we'll come back and we'll have a wee look at the results of that poll as we go on. Okay, before we get started, I very briefly wanted to just put some of the new law into context. Our research at Flexibility Works shows that 61% of Scottish workers at the moment already work flexibly, and that's up from 46% before the pandemic. And of those workers in Scotland who don't currently work flexibly, 21% would like to. So that means that 82% of Scottish workers at the moment either have or want flexible working. So demand obviously is pretty huge. Employers in Scotland who offer flexible working are generally very positive about the benefits that it has for their organisations. 71% of businesses in Scotland say that flexible working has been good for their business in one way or another. And 69% of employers in Scotland believe that flexible working has a role to play in boosting Scotland's economy. And 46% of business leaders think that employee productivity has improved because they have flexible working. So lots of demand, all fairly positive from an employer's perspective, and yet in Scotland at the moment, only 28% of job adverts mention flexible working. So while by no means perfect, the new legislation is a step towards making it easier for people to ask for flexible working when they're already in a job. But it doesn't explicitly say anything about recruitment. And we would argue that that's a huge missed opportunity, given the fact that so many people want flexible working, and at the moment so few job adverts mention flexible working. So a huge missed opportunity, one that we really hope and would encourage you to explore, even without a legal mandate. And we're going to hear from our speakers about how being more open to flexible working during recruitment has really benefited their businesses as well as the people that they've recruited. We've also got some really strong data. We've got practical tools in the space of recruiting flexibly. So if you need any help and support, please do let us know. So that is enough from me. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is Michael McLaughlin. As I said, Michael is a partner at Shoosmiths and an employment law expert. And he's going to take us through the new legislation. So over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Nikki, and good morning, everybody. Just before I come to the proposed changes, it's perhaps interesting to reflect on what's driving the changes and why these changes are being introduced now. Not a lot of people know that actually there's an ongoing obligation on the government to review flexible working rules to see whether or not objectives are being met. And it's interesting to reflect that we're actually 20 years from the introduction of the first series of flexible working rules back in 2003. But the Children's and Families Act in 2014 introduced an ongoing obligation on the Westminster government to review flexible working rules to see whether objectives are being met. And this led ultimately to the Taylor report in 2017. And their conclusion was the government should consider more drastic steps as to how to promote, and their word was genuine flexibility in the workplace. And that led in March 2018 to a task force being set up at Westminster to try and do just that, which is to promote genuine flexibility in the workplace. So these current new rules, which are coming into force, they started life in September 2021. And of course, that's of mid-pandemic time. And perhaps the pandemic and home working had an influence on this. But the consultation that the government put up had a really eye-catching title. It said, "Making flexible working the default." All right, so no doubt Nikki and Lisa and everybody at Flexibility Works got terribly excited, and a lot of people got terribly excited that this meant that the right to work flexibly in some form or other was going to become some form of automatic right, some sort of default right, and that's certainly what the billing suggested. It turns out that it's not going nearly that far, and what was really intended at that time was to convey that there is going to be a day one right created to make a flexible working request. So that when the result of the consultation came out in December 2022, it's just last Christmas, the main headline of the consultation was that on day one, any employee would have the right to make a flexible working request. So that certainly grabbed the headlines. But as we sit here this morning, it's not currently in the planned legislation. So the draft Act of Parliament doesn't at the moment contain a day one right to make a flexible working request. But the team at Flexibility Works were not deterred in trying to find out what was going on there. So they've been burrowing away, emailing the government and speaking to the government to try and find out what the plans actually are. And it appears that there is an intention to create a day one right, but that it's just not in the current legislation. So there's a wee bit of smoke and mirrors in there, because I struggle to understand if there's intention to introduce it at the same time as the changes I'm about to talk about. I just don't know why it's in there. And then that's maybe something that we can return to when we're having a more general discussion. But as matters stand here today, no day one right. And so the 26-week qualifying period would appear to still be likely to apply. So we'll just have to see how that develops. So there are 4 key changes that are coming in. The first of those is that employees will be able to make 2 flexible working requests in any period of 12 months instead of the current 1. And that's a relatively significant change when you think about it. And it's going to have some implications for employers, because you can clearly envisage the situation where a flexible working request has been turned down, the appeal has run its course, and that too has been turned down. And potentially there's scope for the request to be remade either on the same terms or on slightly amended terms. And you can clearly see that the argument from the employee who's had the flexible working request turned down is that they request that the initial consideration and then the appeal will have to be heard by different people, because the existing managers will clearly be conflicted because they've already reached a decision on it. So you can see right away that there's some thinking that employers will have to do about policies and how they're actually going to potentially deal with an increase in rights in that respect. The second main change is that there's going to be effectively an obligation on employers to consult with employees before reaching a decision either way. Now, unhelpfully at the moment, there is no detail at all as to what consultation might mean. And we do hope that it's not going to be left to lawyers to fight it out in tribunals and courts to establish what consultation means. So we're hoping that there's going to be some secondary legislation or some codes of practice to try and set out exactly what consultation means. Because we all know that in the field of employment law and people management, that you can have genuine consultation where an employer gives genuine thought to a situation and consults openly with employees. And then you get the sort of consultation which is more about telling, it's more information. So that there's a real issue around what this consultation will have to look like. And that's equally important, is particularly important rather, because there is going to be a freestanding right for employees to bring a tribunal claim if the consultation doesn't take place. And enforcement is something I'll return to in a couple of minutes. And the final main change is, well, 2 final changes. The response time is to be reduced from 3 months to 2 months. So there's clearly been comment and research that these processes are taking too long, and that was found to be the case in the consultation responses. And the final change, which again is quite an interesting one, is that there will no longer be an obligation on employees to effectively sit down and explain to their employer how it is that their flexible working request can be accommodated. So most of us will know that the current rules do place that onus, that obligation on employees to set out in writing and to explain to the employer how business will not be affected, how there will not be additional cost, and how their requests can be accommodated. Well, that's being removed now. That part of the process is being removed. Although when you think about it, if there's an obligation to consult, then the employee, clearly that's an opportunity for the employee to effectively persuade the employer that it will work and that it should be granted. So I suspect, in effect, employees will still be justifying and explaining to employers how this is not going to have a detrimental impact on things. So those, in a nutshell, are the key proposed changes. The timescale at the moment, again, the team at FlexWorks are very on top of that. At the moment, it's looking to mid to back end of 2024 for the introduction of these changes. So there's still a fair bit of time before they come in. So there's a fair bit of time to prepare. The government department responsible for these new rules said that the 12-month lead time was to give employers enough time to prepare for these changes. And I would suggest, given the nature of the changes, that's a fairly lengthy period. Obviously there is some training that's going to be required. There's some policies that are going to have to be revisited, but we've got plenty of time. to make sure that all of that is done before the rules come in. And just finally, just a word about enforcement, because it's all very well having new laws, new rules, but how are these enforced? And again, it's been left to employees to enforce rights. So, there are two ways that that a government can affect change in the behaviour in the workplace. You can either place obligations on employers to do things, and if not, then there are regulatory penalties, or you can introduce rules. And if those rules are broken, then it's left to employees to enforce their rights through the employment tribunal channel. And I'm afraid that's for many employees, they will see that the onus is still on them to take matters to the employment tribunal. And it sometimes gets forgotten that there are freestanding claims that employees can bring at the employment tribunal. And it's been so long. I think I probably dealt with one about 15 years ago. They're just not very well used, these particular remedies, and that's part of the problem. Employees can actually bring a freestanding employment tribunal claim if they feel that their flexible working request has not been dealt with in a reasonable manner. And of course, reasonable manner is not particularly well defined, and it's a very broad term. So in theory, that gives a lot of scope for an unhappy employee who's had his or her request denied to take the matter to tribunal. So what can a tribunal do about it? And there's a whole range of other reasons that an employee can bring a tribunal claim. If, for example, a decision about a flexible working request is made on the incorrect facts. But what are the actual remedies? What can a tribunal actually do if it feels that the employee has been poorly treated and the employer has in fact broken the rules? Well, there's two things they can do. And the first is that they can effectively order the employer to redo the process, to have another look at it. But critically, there is no further power to ensure that it's effectively granted. So that's a limited power. And then the financial power is effectively 8 weeks, maximum of 8 weeks compensation if the employee's claim is upheld. And of course, that's subject to the statutory cap on a week's pay. So currently, the maximum award that a tribunal can make if it upholds an employment tribunal claim by an employee is effectively £5,100, which is perhaps not an amount of money that acts as any great deterrent. So I think it's always important when we're considering what the new rules are and what the changes are, to consider the enforcement regime, because I think what people always ask themselves when we're facing a change in rules, a change in law, is what are the implications of these changes? What do we think will happen in the sphere of flexible working requests in the workplace? And I think it's always important to consider the enforcement regime. So the enforcement regime is being extended because if your employer doesn't consult with you before making its decision, then you can go straight to tribunal. But I would say that power probably has existed since the rules were brought in 20 years ago, and it's not very often used. So those are the changes, and that's the enforcement regime. And as I say, if anybody's got any questions during our discussion session or in the chat box, be happy to deal with those, Nikki, at a later stage.
Lovely. Thank you, Michael, for condensing a lot of information into a few minutes there. As Michael says, we have been burrowing away behind the scenes. This government came out with a big headline that, we're going to have this day one right to request flexible working, which we were pleased about, very pleased about. Didn't maybe go as far as we even wanted. Didn't come into recruitment, but a day one right certainly was something that we saw in the headlines, we saw coming out from government, and we're really positive about. On further digging, it looks like that is going to be going through secondary legislation. But we have been assured that this will happen, as much as you can be assured. So we are in our heads preparing for this to happen, that we will have a day one right to request flexible working in the future. What you were saying there about enforcement, Michael, was really interesting. Financial, there's the hassle of redoing the process. But the thing that I was thinking about when you were speaking there is the reputation to the employer. and the damage to an employer's reputation, you know, with social media, Glassdoor, all of these things now, and just given that importance that more and more people are placing on flexible working, you know, it wouldn't be unthinkable that if somebody was having a bad experience in relation to flexible working, that couldn't get out there into the ether and be quite damaging for their reputation, regardless of the kind of financial or the hassle of redoing the process. So that's, I suppose, another thing to think about. So thank you for that. I'm now going to hand over to Dawn, who is the Managing Director at Scotia Homecare Solutions. And I'll let Dawn explain a wee bit about what their organisation do and how they're already using flexible working to their advantage when it comes to recruiting and retaining some really good colleagues. So over to you, Dawn.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenny and Laura Jane, who've asked me to talk about my experiences around flexible working and how we've embedded this into our organisation. My name's Dawn McFarlane and I'm the founder and owner of Scotia Homecare Solutions, and we provide care at home services across the central Scotland, Central Belt, delivering to 5 council areas. So our service is to mainly provide care to elderly clients, and many with conditions such as dementia, MND, Parkinson's, etc. And it's our job to support our clients' wishes and those of the families to allow their lovely ladies and gentlemen to be given the opportunity to stay at home for as long as possible. Our service delivers care packages from 7 in the morning through till 9 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so flexible working is something that my organisation has completely embraced. And what I can say is that it's absolutely transformed and very much improved our service and the recruitment of staff across all 5 council areas. So by providing flexible working opportunities at the outset, all potential new staff are provided with lots of information about what our service provides. And right at the very beginning, we talk about, you know, the availability of shift work days they want to work and hours they want to work. So by doing that, the number of applications has improved greatly. We have reduced our turnover. We also get a phenomenal amount of referrals from existing staff. That's something which we have seen really be a big part of our recruitment process. And in turn, that creates, you know, a much higher retention rate. And also you have to remember that we are heavily legislated by the Care Inspector and by all our councils, and we've got key performance indicators that we have to hit, so it positively impacts our continuity as well. One of the added benefits of providing real flexible work options is that by offering these shift patterns and flexibility around committed days that they're able to work, because people have their own family, childcare, they've got their own caring commitments as well within their own personal lives. And as an organisation, and one which operates within an industry which is constantly sort of battling negative press, it's our job to highlight, you know, how good it can be to work in this industry. Recruitment is definitely slower in our world because we have significant training that we have to include. We also have to go through very high compliance checks and things like that as well. So this can take a bit of a long time. However, as business leaders, if you put yourself in the shoes of, you know, single mums, widowed dads, etc., there are lots and lots of people out there who just want to top up their earning potential, and that's something that we can provide to a lot of people. So there's thousands of people out there who want to work, and it's our job to be able to give them that opportunity to do that. In terms of what we've done, we've completely embraced the modern working arrangements where we can. Now remember, majority of our staff are carers. They don't have the luxury of being able to, you know, work at home. So we try and demonstrate our willingness to adapt to the needs of the workforce, who've maybe been hesitant to join the sector. Scotia have completely embraced this approach, and I can honestly say that it's totally transformed not only our organisation, but also our reputation. So we're now providing a fairly compelling benefits package, which is completely wrapped around the flexibility around shifts, etc. So we've just introduced private healthcare to all of our staff, and we do have a very good competitive pay structure as well. I do need to add that one of the other things which is really important, particularly in our sector, is sickness. Now, we've got around about 60 care staff who work for us at the moment. Last month, we had 5 days sickness across the entire business, and the month before that, we had 3. Okay, so it really does make a massive difference, because people don't phone in sick on maybe the 1 or the 2 days that they can only work, if that makes sense. So when gaining feedback from our staff, many have already said that they know they would find it difficult to find another organisation that provides them with the same or similar work-life package. And again, often it's because it's bespoke to them individually. Okay, so people who only want to do weekends, people who maybe only want to do back shift, etc. So I hope this gives you a brief insight into how relatively simple measures can allow your business to recruit and expand fairly easily, and how you can embrace exploring everything flexible within the business. It's all about, growing your company and staying ahead of your competitors and allowing yourself to compete with other organisations as an employer of choice. So I hope you find that fairly succinct, and like I say, in terms of the experiences that we've gone through, we started doing this right from the very beginning, and it's worked really, really well for us. So it's been the cornerstone of our organisation.
Thank you so much, Dawn. I find that really, really interesting. We hear all the time flexible working can't be done in sectors like yours, in care, retail, hospitality. We acknowledge it's harder. And you made the point there, the carers can't work from home, but there's different types of flexibility, and you've just identified what they are, just having a person-centred approach. You said yourself, they're simple changes. They do sound quite simple when you say them, but so what, we just need more people to be putting them into practice, and maybe just trying some of these things. And
one of the things that we do is we spend a bit more time working on the rota. So that's a big part. So we've now got a fairly robust team servicing that, yes. Which means that the service is delivered without any massive impact. So the investment is now a wee bit is on the other side, rather than just expecting staff to pick up shifts here, there and everywhere. Actually have it. It's a completely planned approach.
Yeah, but that return is coming from that investment. Your sickness level, my goodness, that is so low for your sector. That's incredible. People referring you, we just hear the bad news stories about the care sector. You're getting referrals for people wanting to come and work with you. But ultimately, the people that you're providing that support for are getting continuity of care. And you're not getting people phoning in because we know that quite often they have to do that if maybe they're not getting the shifts that suit them. Their only option is to phone in sick, leaves you in the lurch, leaves the people that they're supporting in the lurch. So really, really smart. Effort's been put into it, investment's been put into it, but hoping, and I'm seeing you're seeing the return from that.
One of the biggest things is investment in staff, and if you actually sit down and listen to what the staff are looking for, this is it, and this is why it works. It definitely works.
Yeah, good, excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing that really, really good, positive story. Okay, before we go on and hear from our other 2 speakers, we are going to hear the perspective of Neil Gray, who is the Scottish Government's Cabinet Secretary for Wellbeing, Economy, Fair Work and Energy. So we've got a little video from him. That's, I think, just 5 minutes long. So Laura Jean's just going to share that with us.
Okay, hopefully the tech fairies are on my side and I can share this. If for any reason it doesn't work, we can circulate it afterwards, but let's give it a try.
Thanks, Laura Jean.
My apologies for not being able to join you on this webinar, which I'm sure will be an interesting and informative session on the Westminster Parliament's Employee Relations Flexible Working Bill. Due to the efforts of employers and workers across Scotland, we are also seeing exciting changes as we see more workplaces thinking about all kinds of flexible working for all kinds of workers in all kinds of sectors. Employment law remains reserved, and for Scotland to make even greater strides on supporting flexible working and securing the benefits of fair work for all, we require the devolution of employment law or, of course, independence to be able to make all decisions in Scotland. Control of employment powers would enable us to create fairer workplaces, enhance workers' rights in Scotland, and help shift the curve on poverty and deliver upon our shared ambition for a fairer, greener and more prosperous Scotland. We're not prepared to just wait, however, for this change, and we are therefore pressing on with the promotion and embedding of fair work practices such as flexible working, using the powers available to Scottish ministers. As Cabinet Secretary for Fair Work, I am very well aware of the benefits that flexible working brings, not just to those groups we know need it the most, such as older workers, disabled workers and those with health and caring responsibilities, but to all workers, and for many different reasons. We know that good quality, well-paid, flexible jobs are vital to enable people to enter, progress and stay in the workplace. That brings significant benefits to employers and businesses in helping to recruit and retain skilled and motivated workers who otherwise may not have been available to them. And recent studies indicate that while over 80% of Scottish workers currently work flexibly or want to do so, only around 3 in 10 of Scottish job adverts offer flexibility. This is something which is particularly significant for low-income workers, for whom having access to flexible working opportunities can help raise income levels and ultimately help them and their families escape poverty. Income from employment is a key driver for tackling child poverty. However, traditional work patterns often present barriers for parents to access and sustain employment. So providing flexible work ensures that parents can access job opportunities that fit around looking after their children and their other commitments in their lives. And our second Tackling Child Poverty delivery plan, Best Start, Bright Futures, sets out bold action to drive progress on our national mission to tackle child poverty. This includes addressing structural barriers to entering and staying in the labour market, which is critical to our strategic aims as a government. And this is why we maintained investment of almost £83 million in employability support in 22-23 and have made available over £108 million for the delivery of employability services in this current year. Likewise, Scottish Government funding granted to Flexibility Works since 2020-2021 through the Social Innovation Partnership is also aimed at addressing these barriers. It has enabled high-quality research to be undertaken that allows us to understand some of the issues regarding flexibility at work and the fact that lower-income families have far less access to it. This funding has enabled direct work with employers in promoting fair work and adopting flexible work practices, as well as partnership working with Clackmannanshire Council to help support their strategy for more flexible working for frontline or lower income workers. We continue to work closely with parents and employers to promote flexible working and wellbeing in the workplace, and we're making good progress on our new childcare offers, which will also support more parents in work or looking to return to work with their childcare needs. The Scottish Government has long been committed to supporting a flexible and hybrid workforce. Indeed, as part of our Fair Work First approach to public sector spend, we introduced the right to request flexible working from day one back in October 2021. We're therefore pleased that the UK Government, which holds the power to legislate on employment, has now agreed to introduce this for businesses and workers throughout the UK on a statutory basis. The bill does go some way to making it easier in practice for both employers and employees seeking flexibility in the workplace. It is of course great that employees will have increased opportunities to request flexible working hours within a year, great that the timescale for employers to make a decision has been reduced, and great that it introduces the requirement for employers to consult with their employees to explore available options before rejecting a flexible working request. However, I do not believe that this goes far enough to support workers. Retaining the 8 business reasons for refusing a flexible working request leaves too much room for employers not to grant otherwise reasonable requests that could benefit workers and also their own organisation in retaining committed and skilled staff. Moreover, the now required consultation period has no minimum time frame nor any further detail. Fair Work is a model for innovation and success, with many employers in Scotland already implementing Fair Work practices. The introduction of this new legislation has the potential to help support businesses to achieve stronger productivity, economic growth and greater well-being. It is important that employers and businesses take time now to familiarise themselves with the new changes that will come into place. Adjusting internal flexible working policies to reflect these and upskilling line managers in advance will all help when the law comes into force. Similarly, such positive steps will help display an open and supportive culture towards flexible working for employees going forward. On behalf of the Scottish Government, I want to finish by taking a moment now to thank Flexibility Works for running this webinar. I'm very grateful for the work you have done over the last few years to help support and promote flexible working within Scotland, and I'm very glad to be able to work with you to ensure we continue to see these crucial outcomes being delivered. And to everyone here today, I hope you find the webinar useful in helping to showcase the benefits of flexible working for your business, employees and the economy as a whole, and for understanding how this new legislation will go towards helping achieve this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura Jane. So interesting just hear the views of Neil Gray there, obviously championing fair work. And I would absolutely agree that, you know, we've got so many fair work champions, including flexible work champions in Scotland at the moment. So many organisations just really embracing it. Many of them are here today. But what we hear all the time from organisations is they want to, you know, to keep going, keep hearing what's the best practice, where could I keep improving things, to keep ahead of the competition, to keep ahead of the curve. So I think that's really encouraging that even though some of those organisations who are what we would regard sort of leading flexible working organisations still want to keep coming along to these webinars and engaging to continue bettering themselves. Laura Jane, I was going to ask, could you share with us the results of our poll that we did at the start, please?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll just read them out. So, yeah, drum roll, please. So we'd asked how confident your organisation was feeling about the new legislation. So 9% said highly confident, 59% said confident, 30% not very confident, and 2% not confident at all.
Okay, that's great, excellent. Okay, so I would say that's really positive, and actually ahead of the CIPD did some research. It was a couple of months ago, and they found that only 50% of employers said that they were ready for the new legislation. They all, and Timewise also did some research, and they discovered that around about 50% of workers were keen to exercise their new rights. So this room here today, this virtual room, I see it again as maybe a little bit ahead of the curve. My maths works out that's about 68% of people confident that their organisation is ready for the new legislation. And for those who are not yet confident, as Michael said earlier, we've got time. There's plenty of time to get ready, to get organised. Obviously, this legislation is going to impact on anyone who's managing staff, who's involved in recruitment. But we have got time, and we're here, Michael's here, you know, lots of organisations here to help you get your organisation up to speed and ready. So thank you for taking part in the poll, and thank you, Laura Jane, for sharing the results. So I'm now delighted to hand over to Kirsten Oswald MP, who is going to share her thoughts on the new legislation and flexible working in general. Kirsten, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and thanks very much for having me. This is a great event to be part of. I'm really delighted to have heard what Michael and Dawn and Neil have said already. This is my kind of event. I think there's a special niche in the world for people that are very and maybe overly interested in employment issues and fair work. But I think it's really important that we do take this very seriously as a topic. So I'll try and speak maybe from a couple of different angles. My own experience away from politics has mainly been as an HR director. I've also lectured briefly in organisational psychology and personnel management. So as well as the parliamentary angle, hopefully I can understand a bit about the issues that employers and employees might be interested in terms of flexibility at work. So in terms of the legislative side of things, the SNP is broadly supportive of the flexible working bill. Neil set that out, and giving employees the right to request flexible working from day one is clearly a good thing. Reducing deadlines in terms of employer responses is also a good thing. I thought it was really interesting that Michael touched on the pandemic in terms of just moving the dial a little bit in how we all look at work, and whether that's from an employee or an employer perspective. The world has shifted on its axis a little bit in terms of employment, and I think that this is a really timely conversation in that context, as well as if you look at it from the legislative side. So these moves in the Westminster Parliament are a step in the right direction, I would say. I think that it's reasonable to have wanted the bill to go a bit further, giving employees not just the right to ask for flexible working, but that right to work flexibly from day one. And we've heard a little bit more about that. I think that, that there is an issue there, just in terms of putting the onus on the employee to always be the one who comes forward. I think that it's not unreasonable to think that people might feel a little bit uncomfortable in taking up a new job and asking right away for something different if they don't know that that is welcome, and that is something that is proactively sought from the employer perspective as well. I think that there's some very useful points have already been made about recruitment, about job advertising and so on. And you want to be an employer of choice if you're looking to get the best candidates from the job market, which I think Dawn set out really extremely well. But I think that in general terms, flexible working is a very helpful tool. It can help us as a country to reduce economic inactivity, particularly among groups who are harder to place in the employment market. So there are groups who are historically underrepresented. That could be parents, particularly single parents. Very difficult to keep all these balls in the air sometimes. Women, people from particular minority backgrounds, people with caring responsibilities. We all know the different juggles and struggles that people have in our own family and friends circles, and how that fits in terms of employment can be very challenging. So allowing and encouraging, more importantly, I think perhaps flexible working does mean that people in these different groups might find it easier to get into the labour market, but also to sustain their place in the labour market, which of course brings significant benefits to them and to their employer. And flexible working itself, I'm very happy to say, is the subject of a bit more research these days. And I think that the more of that we can see, the better. The stuff that Flexibility Works is putting out is really important. But, we can see from some of the information that is already coming out that an employee's mental well-being, their physical well-being can be boosted by having that ability to work in a way that works for them. That can, and I think Dawn again touched on this very effectively, have a benefit in terms of productivity and quality of work, as well as job satisfaction. So, I think that the more that we can embrace and support employers to embrace flexibility, the better place we are to drive that sustainable economic growth in Scotland, and to drive forward these good quality jobs that we want to see people taking up. This year, earlier this year in March, a TUC report highlighted that there's a wide range of reforms that are needed to enable more people in their 50s and 60s to stay in work. And they noted that rather than trying to force older people into work or back into work through sanctions or through raising the state pension age, a focus on providing flexible work would be more likely to help that cohort to remain in work for longer. And of course, we're very well aware, I think, of the different changes in demographics in terms of the workforce. So that is an increasingly important issue for us to ponder. Gingerbread, who are the charity for single parents, also welcomed the flexible working bill, but again thought it was too limited. They pointed to the unemployment rate for single parents, which is high at 12%, and they pointed out that a day one right to request flexible working would certainly be a step in the right direction. And they're pointing out that too many single parents are underemployed because there's a lack of any way for them to get into employment which actually works for their own circumstances. And I think that, you know, more than that, we know that there's research out there that very much bears out all of these points. Organisations which look after their staff, organisations which break down barriers to allow their staff to achieve their potential, and through that for the staff to achieve the aims of the organisation, that these companies are much more likely to reap the benefits of that attitude from a business perspective. And, you know, again, Dawn, I think, outlined that very helpfully in terms of not just retention and, you know, having these recommendations, but also in maintaining the standards which are so important in your area of work. And, you know, simply put, we can just think of this in terms of it makes really good business sense to be flexible. The very interesting research that Flexible Works that themselves are putting out certainly bears that out. I've seen some fantastically interesting research about 4-day weeks, which is also fascinating because the levels of productivity that are sustained through that kind of flexible working are pretty comparable to 5-day weeks. Obviously, that isn't going to work in all contexts and for all kinds of business, but it does maybe suggest that we should open our minds to different ways of working. And, you know, in that context, it's really important for us to recognise that flexible working benefits not only the employee, not only the business, but, you know, society more generally can benefit. We heard a little bit about some of the statistics that sit around this from Nikki. So I know that just 51% of Scottish workers who earn less than £20,000 a year work flexibly, compared to 80% of workers who earn more than £50,000 a year. And that's really fascinating in the context of the different kinds of jobs and how we can work flexibly in different contexts. So, you know, some people might have thought, perhaps until this seminar, that means that some kind of jobs are just not possible to be done flexibly. Now, that's not the case. We've heard that really clearly today. The research that Flexibility Works has also shown that that's not the case. Frontline or not frontline, high earners have always had significantly more flexibility than people who are earning at a lower level. And if we want to create that higher wage, good quality job dynamic in Scotland, then flexible working can play a significant part in that. That's why it's such a big part of the Scottish Government's focus in terms of the 10-year National Plan for Economic Transformation. And you heard from Neil Gray about the focus on fair work, on high quality jobs. And I think we do absolutely need to seek and support greater flexibility at work for people in all kinds of jobs. It can't just be that 9-to-5 office-based flexibility, which I think we're probably all familiar with, because the business benefits and the societal benefits of looking more broadly and supporting employers to look more broadly, I think can be so very significant. I know that Neil pointed to the issue of employment law remaining a reserved matter, so that, you know, there are limits to what we can do in Scotland, but nonetheless the Scottish Government is using the powers that it has to support employers to implement flexible working in workplaces. I think that that's a very helpful and constructive path forward. We need to make sure that where we can, then we are taking positive action to do so. We really do need, I think, further legislative progress in terms of employment and fair work more generally. I would have very much liked to have seen an employment bill that we've been promised but has never emerged. But, you know, whilst that's something that I can not necessarily control, the work of the Scottish Government is something that is able to be taken forward. And so their Fair Work Action Plan, the funding to train change agents who are supporting employers, to support parents and carers and so on, I think can make a marked difference. I think that the other thing that makes a significant difference to people is the real living wage. So in 2014, there were only 14 living wage employers in Scotland. The number of employers now paying the living wage has jumped to 2,900. So that's a significant jump. It means that there are thousands of people who have seen a significant increase in their take-home pay. And these are all parts of the same jigsaw, that puzzle of flexible working, fair working, making sure that the building blocks are there to transform situations for employees and for employers. So, I mean, in conclusion, I think from my perspective, flexibility does work. It works for the staff members, it works for their physical and mental well-being, it leads to success for the employer in terms of productivity, recruitment and retention, time and cost are significantly improved, and the productivity and quality of work also. And it works in terms of that wider talent pool too. Who wouldn't want to be an employer of choice? We heard about these highly impressive sickness stats, and that all fits in with being a positive employer and an employer of choice where people are able to work in a way that actually works for them. So that means that for the greater good, for the good of society, if you like, flexibility is the way forward. It means that people can enter employment, they can sustain employment, and the economy and through that public services ultimately benefit. So I think it's a great thing that we've got this event on today. I hope that people find it really useful, and I would just end by thanking Flexibility Works again for everything that they do in this context.
Oh, thank you so much, Kirsten. I think we just need to take you everywhere with us and to repeat this message. And I think you've said so much there, there's so many things to pick up on, but it's always thinking about flexible working as a tool. You said building block, it's like it's a tool to help with so many things in our workplaces, in our society, in our economy. And for particular groups, we see that it is the difference between being able to work or not work, particularly for older workers, single parents, people who have a health condition or disability. For some women, it's not just a nice to have, it's really that difference between being able to work or not work, and being able to progress in work, to earn a decent income for you and for your family. And any organisation that is committed to equality, and I can't think who wouldn't say that they were committed to that, really needs to have flexible working in their toolkit. And it doesn't need to be overly complicated. It can be broken down into bite-sized chunks. Lots of employers just start with trying something, building from there, and we're here to help employers with that. So thank you for your words, Kirsten. And just a wee reminder to all of you here that if you've got any questions to Kirsten or to Dawn or Michael, please do pop them into the Q&A function, and we will come to those in a moment. So we're now going to move on and hear from, last but no means least, our final speaker on the panel is Steve Collinson, and Steve has a really good story to share. We've been watching the Zurich story play out for a number of years, so he's going to share a bit about what they've been doing, and Steve is the Chief HR Officer at Zurich. So I will hand over the floor to you now, Steve.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm Steve. I'm Chief HR Officer at Zurich in the UK, and I'm really happy to share with you the journey that we've been on really over the last 6 years or so. Nikki, I'm just checking that you can hear me okay, because I'm getting a tiny echo. Great, thank you. Yes, the things that we've been doing over the last 6 years to make Zurich, I guess, the best place to work for the widest range of people, and we've been putting flexible working right at the heart of driving us towards that ambition. I'll declare my interest in flex before I start. I've benefited from flexible working for well over 22 years with my children, and now with the absolute apple of my eye, my 18-month-old granddaughter. To give you a quick bit of background, Zurich, we're a proudly Swiss headquartered business. We operate in over 170 countries around the world. We employ about 54,000 people, but the things I'm going to talk about today relate to our operations in the UK, to my 5,000 talented UK-based colleagues, including our awesome 300-strong team in Glasgow. As a firm, we've made some pretty significant changes in the past few years when it comes to working practices. I think the most significant of which was to move away from an assumption that full-time work was the norm here, essentially switching the default. We found that truly embracing flexibility is driving very significant change for us, and later on I'll share the holy grail, established data about what's changing, all of which is available on our website. Our approach to flexibility means, of course, that we're having flexibility conversations before day one. People join us flexibly, so it avoids the need for "can I ask for flexibility yet" questions. But for absolute clarity, we are, of course, supportive of day one flex. And today I'll cover a specific element of flexible working at Zurich. To come up to date, I need to go back a bit though. So in 2017-18, we were approached by the Behavioural Insights team via the Cabinet Office to take part in a study which was really aimed at understanding whether a lack of access to flexible working opportunities was holding women back in their careers and ultimately contributing to the gender pay gap. I'll come back to the point about access to flexibility at the end, but for now, let's stick with the story. As an HR leader, many fantastic opportunities pass my desk, but few of them are backed up with good quality data. And it was clear that the opportunity being offered by the Behavioural Insights team would allow us to better understand from our own data the impact of flexible offerings. And as part of this partnership with BIT, we committed to using nudge psychology to deploy any interventions which were derived from our data, and then crucially to track the impact of the interventions. We grasped the opportunity with both hands, and BIT created a benchmark from our data, and they also created a core hypothesis for us to test. And that was that explicit access to part-time and job share opportunities meant that fewer women were applying for promotions or to join the firm than might otherwise be the case. And ergo that the pool of talent we had to select from was restricted. Informed by their research, all founded in data, BIT asked us to switch the default to advertise every role internally and externally at Zurich as available on a part-time, job share or full-time basis and with flexible working. And the ordering of those words, part-time, job share or full-time, was deemed to be especially important, and BIT hypothesized that this 8-word nudge change would widen the pool of talent applying to work at Zurich and the pool of talent internally applying for promotion, with an emphasis on this piece of flexible working test, firmly on widening female access to great Zurich careers. At the same time as making the default switch, we adopted an internal mindset that we wanted Zurich to be the best place to work for the widest range of people, and that reinforced our commitment to diversity in all its forms. We think we were the first financial services company in the UK to advertise all of our vacancies this way, and if you look at our career pages today, you'll see that we still do. And you'll also see that we don't bury our part-time and job share wording at the bottom of our adverts. It proudly shouts out in the job title. You'll recall that earlier I said that one of the biggest challenges for any HR director in evaluating whether something's worth doing is getting hold of really good data to understand the benefits. So here goes. In the period since we switched the default, overall, the number of applicants to Zurich for every vacancy has more or less doubled. There's been a 95% year-on-year increase in female part-time workers hired. Since offering all roles as flexible in 2019, the number of part-time hires has increased 5-fold. Around 45% more women were hired into senior roles compared to the same period in 2019. And in 2022, we hired 17% more women into senior roles than the year before. The number of part-time male workers, whilst remaining low, tripled over the period, and overall 5 times more female part-time workers were hired in 2022 compared to 2019 when we started. But crucially, part-time workers still only make up 13.5% of all Zurich UK hires. That's up from 10.7% in 2021 and 6.5% in 2019. I think my own interpretation is that this intervention supercharged our drive to embrace flexible working, and it's allowed us to drag inclusivity out of PowerPoint and into reality. Turnover at Zurich, even in this really hot job market, is low, and turnover of high performers is exceptionally low. And we've also deployed flexible working as a key resource in things like our menopause policy, all of our wellbeing interventions, and also in our domestic abuse policy. So what's been the outcome? I think we reach a whole talent pool that we just didn't appeal to before. People tell us they apply to work for Zurich because our approach to flexibility tells us something fantastic about the culture we have here. They don't necessarily need flexibility when they join, but they know it's something that they can have in the future. Employee engagement at the firm reached its highest ever level in 2022, and Zurich was placed in Glassdoor's 2022 top 50 places to work in the UK. Not that I'm competitive, but we were the only insurer in that index and we ranked higher than Google. So we must be getting something right. And we've reduced our gender pay gap by about 10 percentage points. It's still too high at 16%, but many firms in financial services have stood still on this measure, and a number have deteriorated over the same period. And finally, remember I said I'd come back to the challenges of lack of access to flexibility. We recently commissioned some research that's shown that lack of flexible job opportunities is the main obstacle preventing the over 50s from staying in the workforce longer. And our latest data shows that 1 in 5 adults over 50 avoid new job opportunities due to lack of flexible working. A third would remain in the workforce if it was available. 28% of older workers could be tempted out of retirement. They just want to work from home. And yet, of course, despite this, only 30% of UK job vacancies advertise any form of flexibility, and only 12% show part-time hours. More than 1 in 4 of our Zurich UK workers are over 50, and for them, flexibility is the key. So I'm going to wrap up there. Hopefully I've given you some data to back up the zeitgeist that flexibility is good for business, and it's something that we just take as the default here at Zurich. Nikki, back to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. Again, lots crammed in there, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions for you. Just as you were talking there, I've, as we say, we've been following this story, and it's so encouraging. It's, you know, and it's just those words within that advert, but it's actually what's behind that. You know, you can't just put words in an advert. You know, there's a whole process behind that. It's making sure that there's going to be really good conversations with hiring managers and candidates, and that everybody's really embracing what you're doing. So really important stuff. Really good to see that it's the senior roles as well. And something that just I was thinking about there is actually the impact on men and part-time opportunity, because this is wider than just women in your workplace. This is actually something that has big, significant societal impact, because one of the issues is women still are the primary carers. And what we really need to partly to address that is more men working flexibly. And so what you're doing in so many different ways is all leading to a solution of sort of balancing things up. So really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing the stats. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa now, who's been keeping an eye on the Q&A and the chat, and she's going to present some questions to the panel.
Great, thanks Nikki, and thanks so much everyone. Lots of nice comments in the chat, and also we've got some questions which I've kind of grouped together and we'll put to you. Dawn, there's lots of support for you and your attitude and your mindset and your approach, which I think is really nice to see, really encouraging. And also there was a comment made, which I think was well made, looking at the individual's perspective from Lynn about tribunals, and often the stress of thinking about a tribunal can be quite hard and quite off-putting for people, and I think that's quite important to raise too. Michael, you were talking through that process earlier, so thinking about it from the other side. Okay, the first question is quite a practical one for you, Dawn, if you don't mind, and it's kind of a couple of things rolled into one. Someone is very interested to know, how do you manage these rotas? Because you talked about the importance of rotas. Do you have a particular system or app that you use? Can you talk about that a little bit? And then very specifically, do you employ any overseas students whose visa restrictions allow them to work for 20 hours a week? So something about the app and something about overseas students, if that's okay.
Yes, that's something that we've had to really look at, and we still are looking at lots of technology within the organisation, but the simple answer is yes. We use an app. We use a very well-known company who supports the home care sector with all of that information, and we have our coordinators who are in the office managing the rota. So we actually have different rotas, obviously, for each area. And they're very good, because if we find that we've got a wee bit of a shortage, because unfortunately there will be times when we've got more staff on one day than another, but we have to manage that, and we're very good at saying, listen, we don't need you on Tuesday, do you fancy working, sorry, we don't need you on Saturday, do you fancy working on a Tuesday instead? Like, oh yes, fantastic. So we're always trying to work with the staff to give them even more flexibility. So we're very proactive, I think, is the one thing that I would say. As an organisation, we have to be, and we have to plan. So we're planning our rotas 4 weeks in advance now. Whereas before, when we first started, we were kind of panicking getting through the next day and the next day. So we've really developed that. And like I say, I think earlier on I'd said that we've changed how we do that, and we're now much more proactive. We're planning. And it also means that when we do have the odd sickness or lateness or anything like that, we can jump on it very, very quickly and effectively. So the answer to that is yes, we have apps. We are looking at further systems. And yes, we can recruit overseas staff as well with restrictions on their visa. So yes, we can do that.
You can do that. That's great. So in terms of the rota management, what you're saying is you've got the technology in place, you've got people who are managing those rotas who are on it, but also that part of being very communicative, really knowing your teams and having that relationship is really important. One of the biggest things that I've very much championed is communication with our organisation. We include the staff. We want them to come into the office. We want them to pick up their PPE. We want them to chat to us. If they get their rota out, you know, we're always saying to them, have a look at your rota. Is everything okay? Any challenges with it? Because we can make mistakes as well. They're on the phone and they'll say, oh, listen, you've got me at the same visit at the same time. Can you tweak that and change it? So we're very open with our staff. And I think that's something that a lot of companies, especially when you're dealing with remote workers, they're out there every day, you know, and they don't always get interaction from their management team. So the other thing is that we have a full management team who are all part of delivering care as well. So they're not necessarily office workers. They're working in their car and they're out and they're meeting the team, you know, on a daily basis to make sure they're okay. So investing in the team, good planning and communication is very much heart of what we do. Brilliant, super helpful. Thank you, Dawn. Great stuff. One for Michael now. So a couple of legal points just rolled into one, if you don't mind, Michael. So one, are the 7 business reasons to reject a request still in place? And is flexible working defined specifically in the legislation? Will organisations be able to find loopholes, for example?
The questions are related. No, there are no loopholes. There is a very broad definition of flexible working, and that's never been an issue. But yes, the seven categories of business reason for refusal remain, and that's where the power and control, I suppose, lies from a legal perspective. Is that there are 7 reasons, statutory reasons related to the business's operation, and it gives a huge scope to articulate reasons for refusing. So yes, there is no issue with the definition of flexible working. There's no loophole there, but the 7 reasons remain. They remain. Good. That's cleared that up. Thank you very much. A question to Steve, if that's okay, and it's about part-time working. If the successful applicant to a job wants to work part-time only, but you might believe the position requires a full-time person, how do you resolve this? Thank you.
Yeah, we hear questions like this an awful lot. What about the requirements of a manager versus the requirements of an individual? I think this is where, when we went into this default switch, we did huge amounts of education with our people managers and actually buddied up our people managers. Those who were very well accustomed to working with large part-time teams, with those who were new to it, to kind of let the organisation answer its own questions, so that everything didn't become a question to HR. But specifically on this topic, we made one big change at the firm, which was to say we have a less obsessive focus on headcount, and our focus now for line managers is on delivering to their expense budget. They know what they have to spend on a yearly basis, and instead of saying you can only have 10 heads in your part of the organisation, people are encouraged to own their own expense budget. So when somebody wants to work in a pattern that's different to perhaps the normal, and as we've said, this default switch is company-wide, everybody is required to embrace it, then the reality is that there will always be conversations about working pattern. If there are specific reasons for a pattern to be done differently, that conversation goes ahead. But we encourage people to think about their team as a sum of parts. So if somebody wants to work wants to work 3 days a week, they're the equivalent of a 0.6 of a person. That gives a line manager 0.4 that they can recruit somewhere else. We also encourage line managers to work across teams. So if one has some spare capacity from an expense planning perspective and another has some spare capacity, we encourage them to recruit together and to recruit people who work across teams. It just takes a different mindset, I guess. On things like job share, we always say to people, and I don't want to paint a picture that we haven't had, challenges and questions and requests from line managers to say, I only want somebody who's available 5 days a week and they have to be sat on this desk in this location. But with things like job share, we always say to them, wouldn't you rather have 2 brains? And this is all about hiring the best person for the job. If the best person for the job is a full-time worker, that's the person you hire. So lots of kind of components to make this a successful outcome. The most important thing, I think, for us, though, is that we live up to our promise. There's no point in us advising every role available on a part-time job share or full-time basis, and then people go through the hiring process and feel forced into a full-time pattern.
Okay, super helpful. Thank you, Steve. And a question kind of related to that is about often people might feel that they're overlooked for more senior roles because they want to have part-time hours. So how do you take away that fear? Absolutely understandably, because you see it all the time, senior roles must be full-time. Can you respond to that related point?
Yeah, of course, definitely. So when we made this switch, this default switch, it wasn't just for people joining the firm, it was for anybody applying for any other role. And we've done lots of work to make sure that hiring managers, especially when they're thinking about promotions and definitely into very senior positions in the firm, lots of work to encourage them that the same applies. You're bringing the best person for a job through, but the hours, the days and the working pattern is a secondary consideration, because getting the right person in the right job, actually you often find, don't you, that it overcomes all of the challenges. In some cases, actually, this has been one that's been proven by doing. So where we have appointed people into very senior positions who are part-time or job share, it just shows the organisation that it's possible. I love the phrase, if you can see, you can be, it applies across a multiple, it applies across many lenses, and it definitely applies with flexible working. I also have, when necessary, a really persuasive team of talent acquisition specialists who will undertake those tricky conversations with a hiring manager around, this person scored best, but you don't seem to be bringing them through for this promotion. We need to talk about what's happening.
Really interesting, isn't it? That challenge point, those conversations, talking it through with people who are responsible for hiring and putting people in different roles. It's really helpful. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to come to a practical question and then for some more general legal advice, if that's okay. This is about employee expenses. So how do companies recompense employees that are home working for travelling in general, but potentially also when they're using their own car? Is there some sort of calculation that employers have to pay expenses to people? This might be for Dawn, I think, first of all, something about expenses when people are working remotely, and then others.
Okay, so first of all, our core management team, most of them work in the office, but occasionally will work from home. We're quite flexible about that. So if somebody says, do you mind? Not a problem. With the care staff, who the majority are drivers, we have a flat 40 pence per mile rate that we pay for them. That went up when the petrol prices went up, and we decided to keep it at that level rather than bringing it back down again. So for people who use their own car, they get a slightly higher rate. If anybody's using the company cars, then obviously it's a much lesser price. I think it's 12 pence or something like that now. So it's very easy, and it's done on a mile by mile basis. So it doesn't make any difference whether you're working full time or part time. It's collected, and again, that's on our app as well. So everything, all the shifts are on there, and we can pull that. We can extract that information at the end of each month.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from people about the whole expenses, if people are working remotely or in a hybrid way? Anyone else got any information to share?
Lisa, I can just
Steve,
add
thank you.
something. Yeah, so whilst I would never be one to champion HMRC, actually HMRC gives some really useful guidance on this. So at Zurich we follow the Inland Revenue's guidance and mileage rates just to the letter. We just find it keeps everybody safe.
Lovely. I had lots of interactions with HMRC last week, so I hear what you're saying, but lots of good guidance on there. Thank you, Steve. Michael, could you share with us practically what you think employers should be doing to ensure they're ahead of the curve for this new legislation coming in? Any thoughts or advice for people here today, practically?
We were talking earlier on about time to prepare for new rules and time to get ready. And thinking about it just as, because lawyers always look at things from a slightly negative perspective, because when we get involved in flexible working situations, it's very often a dispute. So that kind of fuels our mindset. But you see, all the range of other speakers and participants this morning come at it from a totally different perspective. So I've been listening to the discussion, listening to some of the really interesting stories. And I think if generally speaking as an organisation, you are open, no matter what your size, because some of the most resistant organisations to any form of flexible working can be small organisations, you know. So this is not just criticism of larger organisations, larger employers. If you're open to it, and you're open-minded, you're ready. Because and it really flows from the examples that both Dawn and Steve have given, because you can work the policies through, you can work the paperwork through. This is not difficult. The difficulty, employment lawyers will tell you, the real difficulty comes in when you end up with a dispute. And you end up in disputes either because the employee wants a very, very unreasonable and restrictive I want to work 3 hours on a Tuesday, 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon, that sort of thing, which you get from time to time, not often. Probably more often is the sort of thing that Steve has alluded to, which you get managers who just want to see people sat in a chair. So that's how you get ready. You know, you get ready by being ready for it as an organisation and being open to it. Day one rights, I really don't think that's going to be such an issue. I think maybe Kirsten alluded to this earlier on. If you've signed a contract for a job and you start it on a Monday morning, I don't think many of us would do the first thing that we would do when we logged on to our new job was make a flexible working request. I think if you wanted some flexibility, you'd probably explore that in the recruitment process, you know, even if it's not on the advert in the way that Zurich have them on the adverts. If it's not on the advert, but the job interests you and you think you've got a decent CV, you would apply for the job, and then you would try and involve yourself in a discussion about it. So day one rights, no, that's perhaps not the particular game changer. So plenty of time. You need to review your policies. You need to have a think about your approach. And as an organisation, I think organisations at senior level, driven by people like Dawn and Steve and FlexWorks, is think about your organisation. Think about what you do. It's not just about desk workers, because flexible working doesn't mean working from home. You know, we all fall into these traps of thinking it's either part-time working. You know, so Dawn has introduced all sorts of flexibilities. No doubt it's about shorter shifts. You know, there is no set shift. You know, a shift can be 2-3 hours. You know, it can be anything. And it's just about thinking about what your organisation does and what it really needs and what sort of flexibility. And once you're open to it, you're ready. And you will actually encounter fewer legal problems and you'll have smaller legal bills if you don't involve yourself in disputes with employees over flexible working requests. Because some of these can be the worst types of, they're worse than grievances sometimes when they go wrong. Worse than a messy grievance. Thanks, Michael. Some good advice there. And I think also encouraging people just to go for it. If you see a job that you're interested in, hopefully it does mention that it's offered flexibly, but if not, go for it and have that conversation if the employer at that point hasn't mentioned it up front. Thank you for that. Any final top tips? I'm going to come to Kirsten first. Any final top tips for the people that are here today, or advice or things to think about as we move forward? I'll come to Kirsten first, and then I can see Dawn's looking very enthusiastic with a hand up. This is great. Good. Kirsten, any final thoughts from you? You're on mute, I think, Kirsten. There we go.
Top tip is to make sure that you're not using, you would think that we would all be absolutely able for that, but it still catches us all out sometimes. I think my top point that I'm taking away from this is actually that I hope that folk have listened to the real life examples that have been given here, because it is absolutely possible, and absolutely possible for it to go really well for all parties concerned, for us to be a little bit more open-minded and flexible about how work works. You know, whether you look at the examples that Dawn has spoken of, or the ones that Steve has spoken about, whatever kind of job it is that you have available, is it really the case that that can't be done on a flexible basis, or is it just the case that it hasn't been done on a flexible basis up till now? And I think those of us who've been looking at this and you know, working in a way that allows for flexibility would, I think, without exception, tell you that this can be a real game changer, can be a real positive for your business. And I hope that people feel maybe a little bit more confident to go away from here and try something a little bit different, in the hope that they will see the benefits from their perspective and from the perspective of the employee.
Oh, thank you, Kirsten. I think that's really encouraging, and you can definitely hear your HR experience coming through in all your words today. So thank you for that. Dawn, I think you had some final thoughts, and then Steve, I'll come to you.
I think from my point of view, my background has been in recruitment, and up until recently, I did all the recruitment myself for the business. We've now got our own in-house recruiter, our own recruitment executive, and funny enough, she used to work for me a number of years ago. And the key is to ask people at interview, what can you work? What would you like to do? Even our referrals, we get people phoning up and saying, oh, I heard you're recruiting. Just have a conversation and say to them, come on in and have a chat with us. Let's see what we can come up with. As I said earlier on, I don't know whether I mentioned it before, we work 7 till 2 and then a 2 till 4, a 4 till 9. So we have a split shift. So if somebody does come along and say, well, I can only really do a 10 till 3, that's not definitely going to work. And it's okay to be, you know, transparent with people and say, this is what we need, this is what our hours are. Because I have to say, if you give people what they're looking for, it makes a massive change to your retention and to sickness. And as I use the old phrase, you know, let's all stop trying to put a square peg in a round hole. I remember the days when I would apply for a job and they'd say, hey, that's great, okay, we've offered you a job, so can you get here in Glasgow for night 8 o'clock in the morning? And I go, yes, that's no problem. And inside I'm going, oh Jesus, how am I going to get there? 8 o'clock start. You know, I used to stay in Dunoon, and I said yes. And I was the type of person that would keep, you know, you'd go, but 2 years down the line, you're thinking, I can't do this anymore. So people's, you know, approach to work is very, very different, and it's a changed world, and we have to adapt to that. So that's my final point.
Thank you, Dawn. And it is, no, it's brilliant. And just that open-mindedness, you know, having that conversation, super helpful. Thank you so much. Steve, did you have a couple of final?
Yeah, just a few final thoughts, and they follow very much on from Dawn's. For me, making flexibility work has to be about the culture of your organisation. There's no point in changing your job advert wording if your organisation isn't prepared to back you up. So we did a ton of work before we ever went anywhere near changing our adverts to make sure that managers were ready. And then 2 other thoughts. Remembering that flexibility is about more than parents, I think, is really, really important. Whilst it's very important to work in parents, flexibility is important to many other people too, and making sure that your organizational systems are ready for that. And then finally, let's stop making it about cost. If anybody ever asks me on my colleagues on my executive team to create a cost benefit analysis around flexibility, I always say, we're done here. This isn't a conversation. This is about doing the right thing for people, because the one thing I can absolutely guarantee, and Dawn, I bet you would say the same, this pays back. Making sure your organization is truly flexible pays back in loyalty, lower retention, and fantastic employee engagement.
100%.
Great. Well, what an encouraging way to end. And I think actually just hearing that, I find it very reassuring and comforting, hopefully for everyone here today, really practical. That culture piece is so key. This is about people. But when you treat people well, fairly, you have those open conversations, understand that they're more than just you know, their job, it can reap benefits for the business. We don't necessarily have to see that on a spreadsheet. Thank you so much. And I hope to everyone that's here today, you've taken something away that's been very practical and helpful to your organisation, whether it's been about the legislation or just something that can help you in your day-to-day role. I think something that I've taken away, we've mentioned it a few times, is really that importance of supporting and helping our line managers to have these conversations, to interact with their teams, how to deal with flexible working requests. You know, you can have the best policies in the world, but we know oftentimes it's the conversation between line managers and their team members that are the make or break point. So to get ready for the legislation, I think it's all our speakers have said, or really just to have that flexible culture. Supporting your managers is really key to all of this. So that has been one of my main takeaways. On the subject of training and support, in the autumn, we're going to be offering some new practical workshops to help everyone who needs it to get ready for the legislation coming into play. So this might be for anyone who's involved in recruitment or has line manager responsibilities or involved in people strategy. It will be a more in-depth and interactive version of today's session, and we'll have some legal input from Shoosmiths, and there'll be lots of materials for you to take away as well. Imagine it'll be about a half-day session, maybe about £300, that sort of thing. So if you would like some more information about these sessions, you could pop your details in the chat function or send us your details after the session today, and we'll make sure that you receive all the information about that. And I do believe there's some sort of code for an early bird discount for these workshops, and who does not love an early bird discount? So let us know if you're interested in those, okay? Beyond that, if you want to find out any more about flexible working culture, how you develop it, any challenges that you might be having, how to talk through how to prepare for the legislation coming into play, please do give us a shout, give us a phone. The other speakers, I'm sure, are totally open for conversations too. We deal with organisations day in, day out who are dealing with flexible working challenges, cultures, opportunities. We love dealing with this sorts of things. We are here to help you. Please get in touch. We've got another event coming up, I believe, later in the autumn. It'd be lovely to see some of you there. So last thing to say is just thank you all so much for coming. To our amazing speakers, we really appreciate your time. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you all so very much. And to our supporters and sponsors, who are Scottish Water, Pursuit Marketing, Quorum, Arnold Clark, and the Scottish Government. Thank you all very much too. Have a great day, everybody. It's been lovely to see you. Thank you.